Well, hey there, gang. I've got a Gibson SG Jr here today. It's about a 10-year-old guitar, and wonder of wonders, the headstock isn't broken on this thing yet. Can you imagine? But we're going to do some serious modifications. We'll un-junior it, and turn it into a senior with this. This is a de-armament pickup. It's a very old sound hole unit, and wow, it even smells old. That smells exactly like the used bookstore I used to hang around when I was a kid. I'm having one of those nostalgia scent memories. You know those ones? Wow. Okay, sorry. Having a moment. But we'll obviously have to route out for that in some places, and we're going to fool around with the electronics a bit. We'll shield the whole thing, and we'll see what it turns out like. Should be pretty fun. Just having a look at the inside here. You know, we're going to want a switch to control those pickups. In early SG Juniors, the 60s models, the volume and tone controls were down here, next to the edge of the instrument. And you had this nice big open space above there you could fit anything you wanted in. But now, in the current configuration, they've got the tone right smack dab in the middle. It kind of cuts off the real estate a little bit. So what I think we're going to do is take the volume and tone and shift them over. So this will become the volume. The tone will go where the jack currently is, and we can have the switch up front. And as for the jack, I was a little bit leery of doing this because the SG is quite a thin guitar, but I think we can actually get a side-mounted jack in there. We use an electro socket here. It'll take some fancy drilling, but I think it's possible. There's a crucial thing to consider before we take off the strings, and that is the height of the pickup, which seems to be about 8 millimeters at its deepest. And if we have a look at the area where we're going to be installing it, I'm going to hold down the strings on the last fret here and just check that. Now we've got the pickguard there, so I can't get in exactly the right area, but if I go ahead of it there, it seems to be about 8 millimeters there too. So ideally, you know, it means we're going to have to do some routing of the top wood. Ideally, we're going to want 3/32 to 1/8 of an inch with 2.4 to 3 millimeters between the bottom of the strings and the top of the pickup. So we can't just install it straight on the top wood there without routing. We couldn't get away with it. We're going to have to route. Now this guitar is going to be used for slide, and it would be really nice if we could line up the front edge of the pickup with the theoretical 24th fret mark, you know, the second octave. It would act as a positioning device if you're sliding up there. As it turns out, that line is basically the back edge of these screws here that hold the pickguard on. So I think we're in luck. That could be the front edge of our pickup cavity. The other thing I want to do is make sure that the pickup is centered relative to the neck and the body. So I'm just going to run a line down from a ruler held against the sides of the fingerboard. And if we bisect that, we should come up with the center line of the instrument, or at least the center line of the neck. You wouldn't want to rely, for instance, on these two screws, assuming that they were centered on the center line of the neck. In this case, the run of the outside comes about 2 to 3 millimeters outside this screw, and on this side it's about even with the center of it. So, you know, it's best to measure. Let's measure this. It should be around 75 millimeters if memory serves. Boy, that's fun. It's almost exactly the width of the pickguard at that point. So it looks like we're going to have to add a couple more screws and cut this off here. So we'll have a fore and aft pickguard. Rowe Industries, Toledo, Ohio, USA. I've discovered over the years that the pickup cases here are pretty irregular. They're usually somewhere around 5/32 of an inch radius on the corners. So 5/16 diameter drill bit will usually get us pretty close. Oftentimes each corner is a little bit different than the others, just the way they were manufactured. I usually try to take a picture of the innards before I start disassembling anything. Although at this point I think I'm just going to replace everything in here anyway, so I'll just remove this all as one sort of unit, which we could maybe reuse later at some other project. Because the new scheme is going to be considerably different from this. Just getting rid of zip ties. Having some fun times with this copper shielding tape here. People ask, what's better, shielding paint or shielding tape? And they both have their places. The tape's pretty. Shielding paint is actually sometimes easier to get a better job with. It's certainly faster. And like in a Gibson route like this, where you've got all these little bumps and protuberances and stuff, it's hard to get the tape to lay in there straight. It just, you're constantly fiddling around and it takes an hour. So I tend to lean towards the paint these days just because of rapidity. Like, how much can I charge someone to do this, you know? But the current situation being the way it is, and shipping times being super long and unpredictable, I've run out of paint, so I'm using the foil. Oh, and if you're going to use the foil in one of these Gibson style routes, where you're going to have a whole lot of little pieces, make sure you get the stuff with the conductive adhesive backing on it. There are unscrupulous dealers out there on Amazon and elsewhere that will try to sell you copper tape that isn't conductive, and in that case you've got to go ahead and solder each and every one of the little joins. And in this case, where I've got like 50 little pieces of tape in here, it's just a real mess. It would take you all day. So whatever you do, spend the extra money, get the adhesive backing that's conductive. I'm using a razor blade to scrape up to the line. In areas where there's a bit more waste to remove, I'll use a file. Now I'm going to want to screw this pickup down to the face of the guitar. And to do that, there are two holes that go through the cover plate here, which actually accommodate a P90 screw pretty well. However, at this point they are currently riveted to this piece of metal on the back side as part of the clamping arrangement for the sound hole pickup. Now, I'm going to have to drill these out, and obviously this requires a bit of care, because you don't want to go too fast, develop too much heat, or send a whole lot of iron filings down into the pickup, because that would be bad. So, you know, some care should be taken. I'm making a custom routing jig out of 4 pieces of plywood. The central ones are the correct width, and I can slide those back and forth to get the right length. So I'll glue those all up. I also relieved the front corner so that I can fit that over top of the fingerboard extension there. And I'll super glue that in place and also clamp it on top of the instrument. I'll start routing with a 1/2 inch pattern bit here. It's a short one. And then switch to a 3/8 Stumac bit so I can get those tight radius corners. And that's a pretty good fit. Okay, next question. Do I route a channel through here like a Telecaster? It goes underneath the pickguard? Or what are the chances that they hollowed this thing out in exactly the same way they would for a standard SG? You know, I'm just going to check that out, because there does seem to be a cavity that extends forward of the bridge pickup. Yes, it does. How far forward? Oh, yes. Very good. A little relief channel for the pickup wire. Just checking out options for jack placement here. This spot seems like it would be a natural because it's got this big bump out, lots of support, and it would hide the jack, most of it. But then we've got the screw that comes in from the top, from the cover plate. So I'd probably have to lop that off so that it wouldn't short out against the jack. The electro socket, which I like and which this customer prefers, I mean, it really does add a certain amount of length to the installation. So, you know, you're getting pretty close to the inside of the cavity. Not that it would matter. I don't think we'd be shorting out against anything on there. I do have this football plate, which kind of fits in that area. I could probably make that work. It would be shorter, but I don't really know what I'd gain. The other thing is, this customer plays seated a lot of the time, and he actually prefers it if his jack is up closer to the strap button there. Just, it's out of the way for him. So that's the other option. I can go up here, drill that hole, and then maybe make an intersecting one that comes along over top of this pot and have the wires feed in that way. Like, there's no good spot here. Like, that's ideal right there. But the pot's right in the way. So, yeah, I guess I think I'll go up top. We have to be careful because this is drilling freehand. This is a big, deep, wide hole in a skinny guitar. And, you know, if I wander one direction or the other, that's going to come out through the top or the back. And I'm sure that would make a great screenshot for the, the title page of the video. I'm sure we get lots of views with that one, but I don't want to be that guy. So this is a bit of a nail biter. Let's take a deep breath and cleanse our chakras. Okay, I've very carefully marked center in the correct position here. I have the guitar resting against the padded front of my bench, and the headstock is actually right on the top of my foot, which sort of acts like a built-in pressure gauge. I know I'm not putting too much stress on the headstock because I'm going to start to hurt my toe. Laugh, but it works. So this is my 7/8 inch sawtooth Forstner bit, and I'm just going to go really slow, very carefully, and keep sighting my way down there. Get myself over top of the drill bit so I can see vertical, basically, and just I'm going to take my time. Freehand cutting with a sawtooth or Forstner bit just takes a long time in general, so this could be a 5-minute operation. As we get closer, I can test the depth using the electro socket with a jack installed to make sure I'm not going to bump up against the end of the hole. Some attempt has been made to artificially age or relic this guitar. I'll show you some of that later. But just to make sure that the finish doesn't want to crack or wander where I've drilled through it here, I'm just putting a little thin super glue on the margin. Okay, I've marked a point about even with the contacts on the jack here, and enough above the pot that I'm not afraid of fouling it with the wires. And I'm just going to drill that little hole there. Okay, I've marked a point here that's pretty much even with the end of the contacts, so I'll have a straight run for my wire, and another point here that's above the level of the pot, so it'll be pretty easy to feed the wires through, and I'll just drill that little hole. Having shielded both pickup cavities, I have to run wire to them so that they're all on the same ground circuit. Coloring in the outline so it's not so visible under the pickup. I like to do as much soldering or soldering off the guitar as possible so I can use my little helpy hands here. Just makes things easier. I'm extending the leads on the dearmament, both the hot and the ground. Note that I used some shrink tubing over top of the hot lead there. If I leave the ground bare, I can wrap it with some foil and basically make my own shielded cable. That'll protect it during the entire run, even those spots that I couldn't get the foil inside the guitar. Put another shrink wrap over top of it and it's ready to go. Just checking to make sure it works at this point before, the wonderful process of getting all those wires through the little channels. Just checking out the length of these screws here. I think maybe we should go ahead and make them a little bit shorter. What do you think? It's kind of scary. See that? That is an official Gibson USA right angle 3-way switch for use in these SG style bodies. And it's flush. There's no thread exposed. So that means I'm going to have to go in there and route out a cavity big enough to house it so that I can gain that 1/16 of an inch. Can you imagine my joy? Or maybe not. I looked through my stash and found this thing, which fits much better than the official Gibson one, and I really don't want to route out that tiny little outline. because the material's so thin to begin with, and no, too much work. This is what we're going with. So it looks like a bunch of spaghetti, but it's actually a pretty simple scheme. Just one volume, one tone. But in this case, the tone pot will only affect the bridge pickup. This player doesn't care about darkening the sound of the neck. He's going to run it full out all the time anyway. Just leave it off, not have any of extra load on the signal. So, you know, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to find in any of the schematic libraries. So at one point I figured out how to do this. I'm glad I kept the piece of paper that showed me how. Basically, I just run the signal from the bridge pickup to the tone pot first before going to the switch. And there's no jumper between the volume and the tone. So the neck comes to the volume and then goes straight on out to the jack. So it's isolated, basically. You know, I'm not an electronics whiz. I'm much more of a woodworker. If you give me a schematic, I'll try and do good, clean work. But I'm certainly not a virtuoso at this stuff. Okay, I think we're ready to button this up. No, I didn't forget to shield the back of the cover plate. Just going to do a quick little clean and polish here. We can talk about the relicking on this guitar while I do that. It seems like someone has come along and tried to age this prematurely. You know, in real life, the same mark doesn't get made in exactly the same place to the exact same depth over and over again in a pattern, especially when adjacent areas are pretty clean. On the back, it's the same thing. You know, there's real belt buckle wear, and then there's pretend. I don't know. I just think if you're going to do it really, really carefully. Go all out, or don't do it at all. There's some heavy scratches around the posts here. If you look at older guitars, this is one spot, you know, underneath the bridge, which is almost always completely pristine because nothing can touch it. Now I suppose you might cause some damage if you're really, really clumsy with your stringing technique, but, you know, come on. Unless someone is charging at the stage with a spear, how do you suffer that mark there without breaking your volume pot? I don't know. How does the same triangular shaped object hit this part of the guitar 3 times to the same depth? And also in this case missing both edges, just right in the middle of the field there. You couldn't lean a guitar against something to make that. Here's a handy tip from a viewer. If you don't want to mess up the slots on the adjustment screws for a Tune-o-matic or similar style bridge, and you don't have one of those expensive drivers designed specifically for the task, you can always make your own out of a hardwood dowel. Works great, won't cause any damage. It was too late for this guitar, but you know, something to consider for future use. So I think we're ready to call this one done. Pickups are in, it all went back together. There's something I could have mentioned earlier, and that is a warning for people who want to find old pickups from different manufacturers, you know, in pawn shops or something, and put them in the same guitar. And that is, sometimes they won't be in phase with each other. In this case, we got lucky. You know, when you hit the middle position, they work together. They're not all thin and plinky. We're dealing with single wire pickups in this case. There's one hot, one ground. And it's not a simple thing to reverse the polarity on these. And in this case, it might be easier just to have someone make up another P90 reversed. You wouldn't want to try and take the cover off the dearmament, because most of the time you'll end up with a big pile of copper wire in your lap. Routing for pickups in an SG. You saw the size of the tenon there? You wouldn't want to put a full-size humbucker route in this area, you know, 3/4 of an inch deep or something, because you'd lose a whole lot of meat out of that tenon. And in this case, they only had to go down about 3 millimeters, and there's plenty of strength left. But this is a point where there's a lot of stress on the instrument, and you don't want to weaken it too much. The pickguard, I tried to make it resolve as gracefully as I could, but the placement here means it was always going to be a little bit awkward. I couldn't drill that second hole on this side because it would have left this tiny little strip of white material here. It would have broken off, I know it. So I thought it was safest just to, you know, cut straight across. I suppose if I get a rainy day, which is actually kind of laughable because I haven't had one of those in a very long time, and if I get some extra pickguard material, I can always make him a new one that will sort of rise up here in a custom fashion and be a bit beefier on this side and maybe encapsulate this a little bit better. But like I was saying, routing for these pickups is always kind of hit and miss because, you know, there are no straight lines in these, and every corner is kind of different. They're bulbous and they're not symmetrical, so they always end up looking a little bit wonky. And, you know, this is obviously a Frankenstein. right? Like, you don't expect to see this pickup in this guitar. So at a certain point, it is what it is. I'll try and play a few things on this. It's in open G right now. I use my crappy little amp under my fluorescent lights so you tone aficionados can get some feel for what it sounds like. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys.